This conference will now be recorded.
So like we said, it can get a little bit confusing when you make another bracha, when the bracha that you made already is good. So the general rule that we had was if you're having more of the same fruit, you're good to go. You do not make another bracha. If you are having a different fruit of the same bracha, but you still have some, well, I'm sorry, if the other stuff was out, then you're good to go. The bracha goes on all the things that are out. If it wasn't out and you're having more of the same, you don't have to make another bracha. If it wasn't out, it's not more of the same, but you still haven't finished, you have a little bit of that clementine left, and then you take some figs or whatever else you're taking. So as long as you're still in the midst of that first eating, right? And we understand the logic behind it. The question is, has that first eating ended? And now it's a new eating episode, or is it a continuation? So if it's the same food, it's a continuation. If the food is out, it's a continuation. If you haven't finished it yet, it's a continuation. But if it wasn't out and you finished it and you're having something different, then you need to make another bracha. And if you have a number of fruits in front of you and you can make a bracha on one, ideally you should make the bracha on one of the 7 types of fruits that Israel is praised by. 2 of them are actually grains, so that's wheat and barley. The other 5 are what? Good dates.
And it was
Figs.
Dates,
Figs.
olives,
Olives.
pomegranates,
Right? Pomegranates.
And
Grapes.
grapes.
Right? And the order is OD. Not, if anyone, we don't want anyone to overdose on our fruits, but it's OD, right? Which is olives and then dates, and then it's grapes.
GFP.
What was it again? Grapes,
figs.
figs. Wait, where are the dates?
And pizza.
the second one.
Oh, OD. Good. There we go. Okay,
Yeah.
good. Okay, right. So again, so it's so it is olives, dates, grapes, figs, pomegranates. Because you have the GFP things on the internet, right? They're not. I call them GFP. Whatever. Okay, let us continue. So another thing that will cause us to need to make another bracha, which again, it's all the same understanding. Another thing which will create an end of the first eating episode. If everybody, unless you're talking, if you can mute, otherwise we get a little bit of feedback. It's enough hearing myself once. I don't want to keep hearing myself. Okay, so thanks. But please don't be bashful. You want to speak up, unmute and speak up. So another thing that will cause an end of that eating episode and require you to start another eating episode with another bracha is what's called, on page 175, Roman numeral 2, a decision to stop eating, hesech hadat. Hesech hadas. Dat is my mind. Hesech is my mind has moved. I've changed my mind. So if I change my, hello, here's a fine young woman from Irvine. Yes. Good to see you, Gabriel. Good. Yes. So Hesech Hadas is my mind, my dat has Hesech, has moved on. And therefore, I will need to make another bracha. Okay? If you turn on page 176, there is A1, which is a definitive Hesech Hadas, a very clear indication that I finished eating, right? If I started to prepare for Birkat, A is preparation for Birkat Hamazon. I started to prepare to bench. If I'm starting to bench to say the grace after meals, Birkat Hamazon, that means I have finished eating. So if I'm getting ready to bench, and then I say, those brownies look really good. Maybe I'll have just another brownie, right? Now I use the example of a brownie as opposed to a piece of chicken for a reason, okay? and we'll come to that later. But I decided I'm gonna have right. Or the truth is, once I'm ready to bench, anything I decide to eat is already a new eating episode. It would require another bracha. B on page 177, recital of a bracha acharona. Certainly, if I already said my after blessing, there's no clearer indication that I've closed up, I've completed my first eating session than having made a bracha acharona. And this is very, very important because this is where we get ourselves, myself included, where we get ourselves into trouble. If we get ourselves into the habit of, I've finished eating, I'm going to make my after blessing, and then I'm going to move on, right? So then it's very clear. The problem is that we don't necessarily get around to it, and then we decide to have some more. So we get ourselves involved in a lot of these safek, a lot of these unsure situations. So certainly the best practice is to get ourselves, and I'm speaking to myself also, to get ourselves into the habit of, you finish eating, you make your after blessing, then you get up and do whatever you're going to do, and that way it's very, very clear. C on 177 is leaving the place of eating. You got up. Now, leaving the place does not mean going from room to room, right? Because, right? Because once, if you're in the same house, room to room, we'll soon see, is not clear. But you get up and you walk outside, right? That is a clear end of eating, and that's going to become very important. Because let's say, as I'm walking out the door, I grab a bunch of pistachio nuts, and I make a bori priya eitz, and I start eating, and now I'm walking to my car, and now I'm outside. Ooh. Outside is already considered a whole new episode. Even though I've been eating as I'm walking, but outside is a whole new episode. That's not right. As opposed to chewing gum. Why would chewing gum be different?
Is it chewing continuous?
Yeah, there's a continuous, it's the same eating. Whereas pistachios, right? Whereas if I would have, right, shoved it all into my mouth and I'm walking around, so then that would be one eating. It wouldn't be very, very nice or proper or respectful to the people around me, but that would be one eating. That's the gum, it's still in the mouth. But as long as I have a thing of grapes and I'm popping the grapes into my mouth, that's going to that become an issue if we walk out in the middle. Right? We'll come to all of that. Okay. Okay. Let's go to page 178, 3b. Sleeping during a meal. Okay? So now, right? 178, 3b. Right? There's a difference between sleeping and napping. Sleeping in a halachic sense is lying down on a bed or lying down on the couch. If in the middle of the meal you go and teenagers do this a lot, right? They'll lie down on the couch, right? If they fall asleep, that's considered an end of the first eating. They come back, they want to eat some more. That will necessitate another bracha. Napping is, right? It's getting late Friday night, and you start to doze off, sleeping while in a sitting position. Okay? So sleeping is considered an interruption. Napping is not considered to be an interruption. Sleeping would require another bracha. It makes it into a new eating episode, and whereas napping does not. Okay. Also, it'll depend on what type of eating are you doing. That's on page 180, B, number 1. If you're having just a snack, so then once a simple idea of I'm not going to eat anymore, that ends the snack. Because a snack is a very transient, loose sort of eating. You pop a couple things in your mouth and you're finished. So there, once you decide you're not going to eat anymore, yes, we are recording. Yeah. Right? So once you decided that you're not going to eat anymore, so then that ended that first eating. You decide, I'm going to have maybe just one more brownie, So then that will require another bracha. Whereas a fixed meal, so in a fixed meal, so there we're looking at it differently, right? A fixed meal, there we're going to say that even though you might not be, you're not necessarily planning on having some more of that food over there, but as long as you're sitting at that meal, you change your mind, the meal continues. That's all that same episode of eating. So at a fixed meal, you would not be making another bracha. Okay? It's going to depend a little bit. Let's take a look on page 182. A. One who effects a hesed chadas during a fixed meal must recite a new bracha on pleasure food. Pleasure food is things that are not included. Okay, let me backtrack a second. When we eat a meal, right? So then normally we wash, we make hamotzi on the bread, and we don't make other blessings. Why is that? Because that's the concept that's coming up next of ikar and tafel, the main, primary, and secondary, right? You make a blessing on the primary, and that takes care of the secondary. You make a blessing on your cereal, that covers the milk. You make a blessing on your oatmeal, that covers the blueberries or bananas that you might have sliced and added in. Now, when it comes to bread, the mainstays of the meal are considered secondary to the bread. So therefore, the meat and potatoes, the salad, the vegetables, the main course, all of that is considered secondary to the bread. You don't make a blessing on that. At the end of the meal now, you're going to have some cake. You're going to have some ice cream. You're going to have some fruit. That's already not secondary to the bread. That's not considered part of the colloquially we're calling the meat and potatoes. That's extra stuff you're having at the end. So therefore, there you would make a bracha on your desserts that you're having, on the fruits, on the ice cream, on the cakes, on the cookies, on all of those things. You would make a bracha afterwards. So coming back to our meal now on page 182, if I decide I wasn't going to eat anymore, do I make another bracha? So that will depend if it's on the main parts of the meal or not. If it's on the snack parts of the meal, it'll have a din, the same ruling as a snack. So once I decided not to have any more, I decide to have more, I'll make another bracha. Drinks are also considered to like these. Interesting. I do that often, right? I thought I finished, but I'm gonna have a little more. I get thirsty and I drink some more, right? So if you decided to stop and then you have more drinks, drinks are considered like the snacks. You'd make a bracha, right? But the food that on C, 183, the very top, C, food that is eaten to satisfy one's hunger, that's considered subordinate to the bread. That's what I'm calling the meat and potatoes, right? So therefore, in those situations, you would not make another bracha, even though you decided to stop eating that. You decided to have another piece of some of those potatoes or another slice of chicken, whatever it is. There you would not. Okay. Special circumstances. Yes,
Right.
Rose.
What if,
Oh,
One
no,
second,
that's
Rose.
so what if we're having wine? Do we also bless, is there a
Okay.
bracha with the wine?
Okay, so
With the bread?
Rose brought up a very good point, which is wine. Even though the staple foods of a meal are incorporated in the bread blessing, and all drinks are incorporated in the bread blessing. The exception that Rose correctly brought up is wine. Even during the course of a meal, wine would require its own blessing. Now, it gets a little bit tricky. On a Friday night, you already made a blessing on the wine. You said your kiddush before you started the meal. So that will cover any of the wine that you're going to be having during the course of the meal. But let's say it's a weekday night and you're sitting down and you're going to have some wine along with your meal, right? So there was no kiddush that was said before, and there was no blessing on wine that was said beforehand. So in that case, if you're having some wine during the meal, even though you washed and you're going to be, you made hamotzi on the bread, nevertheless, you still do need to make a blessing on the wine. Wine has enough of its own importance that it's not going to be considered tafel, secondary to the bread. Now, a guest is completely different. When you're a guest, you're basically at the mercy of, hopefully, the good services of your host. So your da'at, your thinking, is basically negated because you have no clue what's happening. You don't know what's coming on. I remember I had very close friends who were neighbors when I lived in Israel, and he was a caterer. So his Shabbos meals were quite lavish. So the first course would include a whole host of salads, different types of fish, right? You name it, vegetables, right? And many a person sat down to the meal and thought, oh, I guess this is it. So I better I better make sure that I do it justice, right? So they eat a whole meal from that first course. Little did they know that then's coming the soup, and then is coming the main course, which is all these different main course options. So as a guest, you don't know what's coming. So your thinking is basically moot, right? Who cares what you're thinking? You don't know anything, right? So there, it's not going to be a hesed chadas. If you thought, oh, I guess that's going to be it, you don't know. So that's not going to cut off the eating. At the same time, if the host says, I think you've had enough, right? Or, all right, let's clear off now. So once again, just like when, if you think you're going to stop and the host says, we keep on going, right? It's continuation. When the host says stop, guess what? Party's over, right? And it is stop at that point. Okay, let's jump ahead to 186 to what's called a shinui makom. 186, Roman numeral 3, a change of place, shinui makom. Okay, one who leaves his place is considered to have finished eating. If you then decide to resume eating, it's a new eating episode and it will require a new bracha. Okay. Leaving the house. Look on page 188. A1. Leaving the house. One who's eating an apple or any other food which does not require a long bracha chamona. We'll discuss that soon. Eating an apple in a house, and then you went to a different house. You stepped out of the door of the house. You must recite a new bracha if you want to continue eating that apple. That's the example I gave before of my pistachio nuts, right? You're munching on an apple as you're walking out, okay? It does not matter if his original intention was to leave the house, doesn't make a difference. He left the house only momentarily, but he left the house. He wishes to return to his original place. He had no intention of interrupting his eating. He continued to hold the apple in his hand while he left the house. All of that does not make a difference. However, the end of number 1 here, before number 2, if one merely stepped out the door to his yard or lawn and did not enter a public thoroughfare, the bracha should not be repeated if the original place is still visible. Okay? So you just stepped out of your house for a moment to get something. Your house was visible, and then that would not be considered to be a hefsek. But once you left, then it is. Yes, Rose.
So, Rabbi, why do you have to recite another bracha if I don't understand.
Okay. So the general rule, Leah, I cut you off. I didn't get back to you. I apologize. We'll get back to you in 1 second. I'm sorry. You want to skip?
It's okay.
No, you'll ask. You please ask your question, whatever it was. We'll come back to you in a second. So the general principle is, if it's a new episode of eating,
Right.
it's a new blessing.
Understood.
Leaving where you are, we're in here. We walk outside to the yard over there. That's considered now a new episode. We want to eat over there. It requires a new bracha. Even if I'm eating my apple as I'm walking out, but now it's a new place. That's considered now a new episode
You
of eating.
abandoned your eating place.
I'm sorry?
Sort of be like you abandoned your eating place.
Correct. And it's now a new episode. Yes, Leah.
Sorry, I clicked the wrong button. So my question was, you were saying that snacks, like drinks are like snacks and that they require their own brachas, right? So like, even if you say hamotzi.
Okay. Good. Drinks will not require their own bracha during a meal.
Okay.
Hamotzi covers all the drinks except for Rose's wine that she mentioned before.
Even
But
snacks.
when I said before drinks are like a snack, that if I decided to stop eating and then I decided to eat more, that's when drinks are like a snack as opposed to the meat and potatoes. And that is when I will need to make another bracha not another bracha. I didn't make one originally because the bread covered it, but I need to make a bracha on the drinks. Okay, thanks for bringing that up and clarifying that. Yes, Lily.
Okay, you gave an example about if someone were to walk out to their backyard and then come back in, they didn't have to say a bracha. But then right now, her question that you said if we were to walk outside, come back in, we would have to.
Not come back in. If we were to
leave.
go outside,
And leave.
correct,
Okay.
correct. Okay.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes, Leticia.
Continuous eating while you're walking, let's say in the street, and I mean,
Okay, good. That's an excellent point. We're going to come to that a little bit later, but let me mention that. Let's say I started eating or drinking when I was outside. I'm going for a good walk, and I have my water bottle. I'm going for a bike ride, right? Now, unless you're a very poor bike rider, there's going to be serious shinoi makom, right? You're going to be moving, changing place constantly. So over there, if I started to make my bracha while I was outside in motion, then as I'm outside my house, I'm eating my pistachio nuts. And then I get into the car and I drive somewhere and I continue eating the pistachio nuts. And then I get out and I'm walking to another place and I'm continuing to eat. There only one bracha needs to be said. I'm going for a 5-mile walk. I have my water bottle. I make my blessing as I start to walk. I'm outside the house. I make a blessing. I take a sip. I keep walking. A mile later, another sip. No bracha. I'm doing a bike ride. 5 miles later, I come to a stop. I pull out my water bottle. As I'm driving, as I'm riding, I'm taking some of my water. That will not require another bracha because the whole bracha was for my outside traveling. And even though I went from walking to the car,
It's an episode.
it's exactly right. It's all one eating episode stretched out over time and over place. That's all one eating episode. But we're talking about I started here and I went there. Okay. Okay. Leaving the room is not considered a different eating episode. Okay? So if you go from one room to another room, it's a bit of a suffix. There are those that say another room is a new episode. Others say another room is not a new episode. Our general rule is when there is a debate, a suffix, an unsurety, should you make the blessing or not, you do not make the blessing. So ideally, you don't want to go from one room to another, but if you did, as often happens in the house, you do not repeat the bracha. Okay. Yes.
When you say a bracha, everyone is quiet until you're done with the bracha, right? I'm only saying this, like, what if I were to go out with friends that are not Jewish and they don't know, like,
So
you know,
they,
you just
look,
go on your own. Or,
yeah. Ideally, all those who are Torah observant, when they hear a blessing, they will stop doing what they're doing. They'll answer with a resounding Amen, right? But your bracha does not require that. Okay? So when you are, if you're with friends who don't appreciate that or don't know about that or are not Jewish, so you would quietly, Lily, make your blessing and partake. Lily, what are you doing? Oh, I just thanked God for this wonderful Slurpee. And they'll probably say, that's a nice idea. Wow. Right? And I'll tell you something. I enjoy, as much as I don't like wearing masks, right? The masks come in handy, right? In other words, I'm in the airport and I walk out of the bathroom. So instead of standing there, like talking to myself, which nowadays everyone's talking to themselves on their phones all the time, instead of standing talking to myself, I'm wearing a mask. No one knows what I'm doing. If I'm davening on the plane, I'm wearing a mask. It's not like, what's that guy do over there? Not that anyone really cares what no one's, we always think, people, no one's looking at you. Everyone's just worried about either their own screen, their own phone, or they're asleep, right? But, the mask can make us feel a lot less self-conscious when we do certain things that are out of the norm for society.
Gives us privacy.
Yeah, it does give us privacy. Yeah, someone did something, and if I was sitting up in front of the shul, I would have been very, very careful not to smile. It was kind of funny, right? But I would have been very, very careful not to smile so as not to make the person feel bad or not to encourage anyone else, But with the mask, it was okay. Right? Natalie says, your eyes smile. You have to be very careful. Your eyes smile. But nevertheless, it's not quite as obvious. So, yeah.
I have one more question. Over the weekend, my family and I celebrated Brachot.
Yes.
But my husband and I didn't know the order of the blessings or which ones to say, so we kind of set them off. But I'm assuming we're just supposed to say the motzi one, because we had like the fruits, the different kind of fruits, and then we had.
It was during a meal?
Yeah.
Okay, so the fruits would be considered more like snack items during a meal, right? As opposed to the meat and potatoes, right? In other words, actually they put it well. Am I eating this in order to satiate my hunger, or am I eating this because it's sweet and it tastes good, right? So the things that are eaten to satiate your hunger, that's all considered to be secondary to the bread. But the fruits and things, that's more like snack items. So there you would make the blessings. You'd make one blessing of Bori Pri Ha'etz to cover all of the fruit item, all of the tree fruit items. You make one Bori Pri Ha'adamah to cover all of the fruit adamah from the earth items. You make one shahakol to cover all of the none of the above, one mizonot to cover all of the cake and stuff like that, and then you are set.
But
Okay?
after saying them, we would have to like take a bite out of it.
Yes. Immediately after making that Bori Priya 8, you need to take one of those Bori Priya 8s, one of those fruit tree items, and eat it right away, right? So as not to interrupt, right? We can't interrupt between the blessing and the fulfillment and the carrying out of that.
Which that's considered a hefsek.
That's a hefsek. Excellent. Lily, you'll be giving the class soon. That's considered a
My
hefsek.
husband interrupted me and I'm like, well, you just did a hefsek. And he's like, what is that? You interrupted me.
Okay. All right. Okay. Now, changing, okay. Number 4 on page 190 and going to 191, right? Right? A porch or a sukkah, right? Okay. Even so, the bracha would not be repeated, right? As long as you can see the house, then you would not repeat the bracha. So maybe you were right. If we walk outside over here, right, continue eating outside over there, being that we can still see our original place, we would not make another bracha. Once we got to the parking lot already, there we would require another bracha. Okay. Now, changing places, number 6 on 191. Changing places within a room. Right? Let's say you're at a wedding. Imagine that, Rose. Right? You're at a wedding. So you got this big ballroom. Right? You could have 50, 60, 100 tables set up over there. And I'm sitting down. I made my hamotzi over here. I'm eating over here. And I had some of the cake. I made a mizonot. And then I want to go see some relatives, some friends who were sitting literally across the ballroom. And once I'm there, as my father, Allah Hashem, would say, just to be sociable, I'll have some cake at their table also. Just to be sociable, my father would always say. Right? So just to be sociable, I'll have some cake over there. It's all the same room. No matter how big a room it is, it's the same room. So that would not necessitate another bracha. Okay. And let's go to now on page 192, which is the point that Leticia brought up, right? Page 192, number 9a. One who begins eating while walking may continue to do so without regard to the rules of shinoi makom. Shinoi makom is changing your place, regardless of the distance or the fact that the original place is no longer visible. If in the course of eating while walking one enters and leaves a car, he may continue eating without repetition of the bracha. Okay. One who recites a bracha, C, in a house with the intention of leaving immediately is not considered to have confined his eating to a particular place. Okay, this is not that I started eating my pistachios at home and then I started to go outside, right? I did it planning on going. Therefore, one who buys an ice cream or a candy bar in a store and begins eating on the way out may continue eating upon leaving the store without repeating the bracha, because from the get-go, right, this was planning on eating this on the go. However, D, if at the time of the bracha one had the intention to wait, eat a bit, and only then leave the house, that's already considered a new eating episode. That locks you into the first place. Now you leave, it's a new episode and requires a new bracha. Continuous eating, number 10. A, chewing gum. Okay, one who leaves his place with food in his mouth, chewing gum, sucking candy, not required to repeat the bracha. That is that considered continuous bracha, continuous eating. B, holding the food in one's hand. Okay, if you left the building with food in the hand, not in the mouth, eating in an uninterrupted manner, an element of doubt remains in regard to the necessity of a new bracha. Perhaps it's considered continuous eating, right? Not shinoi makom, change of place, or maybe it is change of place. One should therefore stop eating for several seconds to close out that first eating, and then you can make the bracha, you repeat the bracha, and you will no longer have that doubt. Okay. Lastly on this, okay, and next time we're going to, before we get to the next chapter, which is Ikar V'Tafel, I want to go through the after. We haven't gone through the after blessings, have we? Okay, I want to go through the after blessings. So next time, right, have a Sidur or have a Bencher Birkat Hamazon. Those who are here will be here. Those who will be at home, make sure to have a Sidur, right, or a what's called a Bencher, right, a Grace After Meals booklet handy, okay, because we'll be working off of that.
What is that?
I will give you one before we leave.
Okay.
Right, you probably have it home, but I'll give you one so to make sure that you got it. Okay. Another factor, starting at page 195, is the type of food one is eating. Okay. We'll see next week in more detail. There are three basic after blessings. There's benching, the whole grace after meals, that's after a bread meal. There is what we call it al hamichya, which is made after grains, cakes, or the fruits of the seven species, which is our ODG something F.
ODGFP.
GF, thank you, right? And wine. And then there is what's called the Bori Nefashot, which is the catch-all after blessing that's made on everything that's not bread or cakes or wine or our ODGFP. Okay? Okay? So for bread or any of the alamichya ones, the cakes or those fruits of Israel, the after blessing needs to be said where you ate. Therefore, you've got to either go back to the place where you ate or continue eating where you've gone to. But since that requires an after blessing in the place, what does it do to our episodes of eating? It combines them. It's all one episode. In other words, I'm starting to eat some cake. I walk outside, have some cake. But I have to go back to the house to make my after blessing. So since I've got to go back to make my after blessing, so what does that show? It's not a new episode of eating. It's a continuation. It's combining my episodes. It's a continuation of my first eating. And therefore, I will not need to make another blessing before the cake that I'm eating outside because it's all one episode, because I've got to go back inside and make my blessing. So therefore, it's not a new episode. Let's read together 195. The fundamental rationale of the halach of shinoi makom, of changing place, is that once one leaves his place of eating, meal is over. Ordinarily, one who leaves his place of eating has no halachic reason to return, nor is it halachically imperative upon him or her to continue eating in another place. Thus, leaving the initial location is in effect ending the meal. Certain foods, however, require a bracha charona, an after blessing, in the original place of eating. One who leaves without reciting the bracha charona to such foods must either return to place number one to recite a bracha charona, bracha blessing acharona after, or resume eating in his new location so that a bracha acharona may be recited there, because the bracha must be made in the place that you ate. So either go back to where you ate or eat in the new place. And that way the bracha will be recited in the place where you ate. In such a case, leaving one's place does not constitute the end of one's meal. Should he return for the bracha acharona? It is not considered as if he had never left his place. It is considered as if he had never left his place. Should he resume eating in a new place? This is considered an uninterrupted meal. Therefore, one who eats any food requiring a bracha acharona, an after blessing, bracha, blessing, acharona, after, in place, does not effect a shinoi makom when he leaves the building. Okay? So that is very important. Okay. So on 196, it's going to say this is going to refer to bread, A, 1A, bread, B, any grains requiring the al hamichya, C, some authorities require bracharona in place, also for fruits of the 7 species and wine as well. And therefore, even in that case, you would not repeat your bracha if you went to another place. Now, yes, Gabriela.
So I'm confused. So it says only for food that requires the bracha corona, but that's only for those 3 categories. But then what about the shahakol? Like,
Yes.
I'm so confused.
Yes.
Everything requires
Yes.
a bracha corona?
Yes, but not a bracha charona in the place.
Yeah.
Okay?
Only those
On the
3.
shahakol items, right? So there we make a much shorter bari nefashot. That does not need to be in the place. Therefore, if it does not need to be in the place, then I'm not tied to that original place. So when I leave, I've concluded my original eating episode. I'm having a new eating episode. What must I do? I must make another blessing.
It's the hierarchy of importance.
Correct.
Okay.
It's those after blessings which need to be in the place, which is the after blessings after bread, benching, and the alamichi after cakes, ala peirot after our ODGFP. Finally got it. Yes, our ODGFP. Okay. Number 2 on 197 is very, very important. How much of these foods has to be eaten? So, let me ask you guys a question. How much food must you eat in order to be required to make a blessing before you eat? Just about any amount, right? The smallest amount. You're having 1 chocolate chip, you make a blessing. When it comes to the blessing before, there I'm thanking God for the benefit, the pleasure. The smallest amount, I thank God for the benefit, for the pleasure. An after blessing is based on the pasuk which said, "V'achalta," you ate, "V'savata," you were sated, "Uveirachti," make the blessing. So, when it comes to an after blessing, one is only obligated an after blessing if one ate a certain minimal amount. That minimal amount is called a kezayit. Zayit is an olive. Zayit, like an olive. Okay? But it's not so simple because an olive is kind of small and a kazayit is actually bigger than we imagine a kazayit because let's say if it's cake, right? It's not a piece of cake the size of an olive. It is condensed. The bread is, right? So we normally say like 2 medium-sized pieces of cake will be considered a kazayit. Okay? But again, one is only obligated in an after blessing if one ate the requisite amount. So therefore, the whole reason why we're saying that changing place is not considered a change, a new eating episode, is because you've got to go back and have to make your after blessing or make or continue eating elsewhere, so the after blessing will be in the place that you're eating. But if you ate something that requires an after blessing, but you did not eat enough of it to require an after blessing, then you're not tied to that place. Do we hear that? I'm only tied to the place, not because of what I ate, but because what I ate requires that type of after blessing. But if what I ate does not require that type of after blessing, even though it was that type of food, but it was not enough food to require an after blessing, then I'm not tied to that place. And if I walk out, I will need to make another blessing. Do we hear that?
Let's have an example.
An example. Okay. I had myself, he's a wonderful baker, and I had myself a good 2-3 pieces of cake. And then I go out for a walk. Now, cake is ala michya. That requires a blessing back in its, it requires a blessing where you ate. So if I'm going to someone else's house and have some cake over there, I will not need to make another blessing on the cake when I get to that house because it's a continuation of my first eating, because I still need to make the blessing where I ate cake. Or if I have some cake outside, but then I go back inside, I know, right? I'm going to have some cake outside. I don't make a blessing. Why? Because what must I do? What must I do, my friends? I got to go back inside to make my blessing. So that first episode of eating has not concluded. Therefore, I will not make another blessing on cake. Why? Because A, I had cake, which requires an after blessing in its place, and B, Gabrielle, I had enough cake to require an eating in its place. But let's say I had one little piece of brownie. That's the type of food that requires an after blessing in place, but I did not have enough of it to require an after blessing in place. And then I went outside, and now I'm going to have another piece of cake. Do I have to make another blessing in that case? Yes, I do. Why? Because I'm not tied back to my house because I didn't have enough of that food to require an after blessing. And therefore, in order to say that the original episode continues, you do not make a prior blessing, we need to have A, I ate the type of food that requires an after blessing in its place, as opposed to shahakol bori nefashot, and enough to actually require an after blessing in the place. So the example was, the first case I had 3 pieces of cake. Therefore, I had what requires an after blessing in its place, the type of food, and enough. So therefore, I do have to go back and make an after blessing. But if either one of those conditions are not met, it's a type of food that doesn't require after blessing in its place. Hershey's Kisses does not require after blessing in its place. Or it does require an after blessing in its place, but I did not have enough to require an after blessing. So in that case, my eating episode ended when I went outside, and I want to eat more on the outside, I will need to make another blessing. Yes, Lily?
I'm gonna give you an example of the part. If I were to go to Costco and I have one sample, I would give a blessing, but there's no need to give an after blessing.
Correct. But if it's really good, and you keep going around,
Yeah, that's what I said.
Sunglasses on, sunglasses off, right? Change your hat. It was so funny. I told a story in shul one Shabbos that I met a guy at Costco. He came over to me. Yeah. And then he was there the next time.
Yeah.
I told you that, and he was giving out Linder chocolates. Oh, he stuffed my pockets with Linder chocolates. I had to make an after blessing. That's how many Linder chocolates I had. Gosh, and each one of those is about 200 calories. Oh gosh, but they're worth it. Yeah. So that's a great example. That's a great example. You go to Costco, right? Now, you have to make sure it's kosher.
Yeah.
Right? But a lot of that stuff is kosher. But you have to be careful. I was just at Costco with Natalie. What's today? Monday we went there, right? So they had certain things that were kosher. So I will, make sure it's kosher, and I go and I partake. But they were giving out the Impossible Burger, which is kosher. but I couldn't take that.
Mhm.
Why couldn't I take that?
It's hot.
It's hot. They're warming it up in some sort of a metal. I don't know what they're using. I don't know
Like a
what.
hot plate or
It's hot. I don't know what. I don't know what they've used that for.
something.
Right.
Could
So
be
that I can't. Even though it was a kosher item, but as long as it's a raw kosher item that's just being put into one of those little doily or cupcake things there. So then, hey, knock yourself out, make your brachas, knock yourself out, and have a good time over there. Yeah, yeah.
Nice.
And if the guy is giving out, if there's an older guy giving out Linder chocolates, if his name is Ben, tell him you know me, and you'll get some extras. Okay. Okay, my friends, we'll call it over here. So next week we're going to pick up with chapter 7, but before we do chapter 7, which is Ikar and Tafel, the primary and secondary, which we've discussed to a degree already, we're going to go through the after blessings. All right? And let me give you a bencher, and that way you'll be all set. Okay? Very good. Anybody here who needs a bencher? We have plenty here. Happy to give. Very good. Okay. Good night, everybody. Feel well, be healthy,
Rabbi,
be safe. Yes, Simone.
I want to ask a quick question. It's not related to the class. And I know
Yes.
it's a little early. It's about Passover. We're having this conversation here that Passover going to be on Saturday. And my question
Yes.
for you, you don't need to answer right now, but you can tell me later. How we going to do, if you want to do soup, how we would warm it up a soup on
Okay.
Sabbath of
Yes. So
Passover.
the first day of Passover is Friday night and Saturday, and the
Mhm.
second night is Saturday night and Sunday. We have 2 days of Yom Tov. So you're talking about if you want to have soup for the second Seder, for
For
Saturday
Saturday
night
night.
Seder, or
Saturday
for
night.
Shabbos day?
Saturday night.
For Saturday night. Good. So there, the preparations for the second Seder can only start once Shabbat has ended.
Okay.
So you can
Oh,
only start your preparations for the second Seder once Shabbat has ended.
mm-hmm.
Okay? At that point, you'll be able to, as long as you have a flame going, you'll be able to take soup and warm it up. And it normally takes a little while till you get to the meal part of the Seder. So usually it's not such a problem.
I love it. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay. Good night, everybody. Good night. Good night. Someone asked me something on the chat. Let me just see what that was. Okay. Okay. Elizabeth, it's okay. Elizabeth, send me an email to rabbic@bethjacobirvine.org. Right? You have my email already? Okay.
Yes, I have your
Elizabeth.
email. Yes, I
Yes.
have your
Okay.
email.
Okay.
I
So
sent
send
it.
me that and I'll send you the shul's address. Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Rabbi.
Very good. Okay. Good
Thank
night. Good
you.
seeing
Good
everybody.
night.
Everybody who needs a little bit of a refuah over here, I wish you a complete and speedy refuah shleim. Everyone should feel healthy and well. Be
Thank you,
well, and
Rabbi.
everyone else should
Bye.
stay healthy and well.
Bye.
We'll make it through
Bye-bye.
this. I don't know. I'm not sure when, but we'll make it through this.
That's right. That's right. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night.